class, we'll be talking about the French education system introduced in Vietnam. In the last video, we had discussed about the necessity and the importance of colonies and how would these colonies be created in Vietnam. Let us take a look at the topics that we will be discussing in today's class. Why did the French want to educate the Vietnamese? What was the dilemma faced by the French for the Vietnamese education? What were the different opinions faced by the French over language selection? Well, the French did not just want to dominate the Vietnamese. They wanted to completely take over their livelihoods, from the clothes they wore as to the lives they lived and the education they received. They felt that they were bringing modernization to the Vietnamese people, and it was their duty to introduce them to these modern ideas, even though it destroyed their local heritage and culture. The best way to civilize Vietnamese was by educating them. By educating them was not an easy task. Many risks came with an educated workforce that the French needed. The first was that the Vietnamese would start questioning the colonial domination as it wasn't justified. The second was that the French citizens who were residing in Vietnam, called colons, started fearing that the educated Vietnamese would end up taking their jobs. Once a decision was made to provide education to the Vietnamese, the next question which arose was, what language was to be taught? Was it going to be French or Vietnamese? Now you must be wondering that why would the natives have to learn Vietnamese while living in Vietnam? This was because they were powerfully influenced by the Chinese culture. Chinese was mostly used by the elite of Vietnam, and the French decided it had to be replaced to achieve more domination and consolidate their power. To achieve this, the French established French schools for Vietnamese. There were a few debates as to what exactly would be taught in these schools. A few policymakers suggested that the French had to be used as a medium of instruction, as it would help the Vietnamese to connect with the culture and civilization of France. They would respect the French sentiments and the ideas and see the superiority of French culture and would work for them. But many opposed this, as well as they believed not everyone should be taught French. They suggested that Vietnamese must be taught in lower classes and only those who reached the higher classes should be taught French. And the ones who acquired the French culture must be rewarded with French citizenship. This was all about the introduction of the French education system in Vietnam. Let us take a small recap of the topics that we discussed today. The French did not just want to dominate the Vietnamese economy and military, but also their livelihoods. The French decided that the best way to modernize the Vietnamese would be by educating them. Most of the Vietnamese were influenced by the Chinese culture, and so the French decided to introduce French in schools. The education of Vietnamese was accompanied by a lot of risks, but it was still introduced. The next debate was, what should be the medium of instruction in these French schools, French or Vietnamese? There were different opinions raised by the policymakers. Some suggested the use of French would help the Vietnamese connect with the French better. Others thought that Vietnamese could be taught in lower classes and those who qualified to higher classes could be taught French.